Hello friends, now let us discuss with your next topic e-way bill. E-way bill. The focus is going to be on the topic e-way bill, where you are going to talk about supporting document. It is not the main document, it is the supporting document. Friends, I think we have discussed about this to some extent when you discuss your documents chapter. Right, so if at all I were to tell this in a very simplified way, I can tell that if at all there is supply, there is no supply. If at all there is supply, and if at all there is no supply. If you tell that there is supply, and if you tell that there is no supply. If there is supply, and if you tell that there is no supply. Right, the focus is on what? Movement of goods. The focus is on movement of goods. The entire focus here is only and only on your movement of goods. If your movement of goods is there and it happens to be supply, friends, you have to understand that the main document would be, if at all there is supply, it will be tax invoice or bill of supply. And friends, if there is no supply, the main document will be delivery challan. This would be the base document. And the supporting document would be e-way bill. The supporting document will be e-way bill. Friends, you have to call this as the base document. This is a base document, right? Base document prepared by the assessee from his own records. Now, when you talk about e-way bill, my friends, it is nothing but your supporting document. It is nothing but your supporting document, which is again prepared by the assessee, but through portal. Which means that the record of the information that the assessee has created now is on portal, which cannot be altered normally. Right? This is a supporting document. It is not a document, base document with which you can have the movement of goods. The base document is always your tax invoice or bill of supply, if at all there is movement of goods which results into supply. If at all there is movement of goods which does not result into supply, the base document happens to be delivery challan. And assessee has to create a supporting document through a portal, common portal. Rather, we have discussed about this common portal when you discuss about your written filing chapter. There are two portals, www.gst.gov.in, the main portal which is managed by GST network, and this is e-way bill portal, that is www.ewaybillgst.gov.in, which is managed by National Informatics Center. And I think I have discussed the history also. Initially they thought of only one portal, but when e-way bill came with effect, when e-way bill was launched with effect from 1st of April 2018, they tried using this common portal, which was only one portal then, and they thought that it is not possible through it. Therefore, they launched another portal specifically for e-way bill, which is managed by National Informatics Center, that is www.ewaybillgst.gov.in. And this supporting document will be again created by assessee only. The only difference will be it is routed through a portal. That being the case, what will happen if at all it is routed through a portal? The difference is, the moment you talk about any document being routed through a portal, it creates a trial which you cannot basically change. It creates a trial, it is permanent, and then thereafter you cannot alter it. So they want to have that certainty when you talk about movement of goods. Right, friends? And when you talk about the bird's eye view, the only section which talks about e-way bill is section 68, which talks about inspection of goods in movement. It does not focus on the e-way bill, but what it is all about, it is inspection of goods in movement. During the movement, the goods can be inspected. That is nothing but your section 68. Inspection of goods. During the movement, the goods can be inspected, right? And that inspection will be prima facie through your base document and supporting document, which is e-way bill. Section 68 is read along with Rule 138, which talks about generation of e-way bill. The main section and the main rule are Section 68 read along with Rule 138. The main section and the main rule are, these are the base provisions. These are the base provisions where you talk about the main section and the main rule. These are the base provisions. And the other rules which are there, which talks about your rule 138A, 138B, 138C and 138D and E, right? They are only the supporting provisions. The base provisions are section 68 read along with Rule 138. Section 68 read along with Rule 138. And all these other rules are only nothing but your supporting provisions. These are the base provisions. And supporting provisions, when you are talking about supporting provisions, you are talking about Rule 138A, 138B, 138C, D and E. These are the other provisions which deals with e-way bill. So base provisions is basically Section 68 read along with Rule 138. Basic provisions of e-way bill are Section 68 read along with Rule 138. 138A talks about what are the documents and devices that has to be carried by person in charge. Right. So when the person in charge, that is the transporter, is moving the goods, what are the documents and devices that he has to carry? 138B talks about verification of documents and the conveyance. A proper officer is having doubt, he can verify the documents and also the conveyance. 138C talks about inspection and verification of goods. If he is having more doubts, not only checking the documents and conveyance will help him out, he wants to even inspect the goods. So it is detailed inspection. 138B talks about normal inspection where he is only checking the documents and the vehicle. So he is not doing in-depth inspection. If at all he is having more doubts, the proper officer can inspect, open the packaging and check the goods. Inspection and verification of goods, that is detailed inspection. 138C. 138D gives the right to the transporter to upload the information about the detention of vehicle if the vehicle is stopped for more than 30 minutes without giving any reason. So it is actually an empowering section to the transporter or the person in charge, where his conveyance is being stopped by a proper officer, but he is not being explained why it is stopped and he is not being given proper reasons for a time exceeding 30 minutes. He can upload that information on the portal telling that this is my vehicle and so officer has stopped my conveyance at this place and it is more than 30 minutes that the vehicle is stopped, but I am not given any explanation. This is only empowering section to the transporter or the person in charge. Now there's a new rule 138E which talks about blocking of e-way bill for non-filers. If at all you are not filing your returns, then they can block your e-way bill, which means that your business will technically stop. If at all you are not filing your returns properly, friends, there will be another consequences apart from other consequences that we are discussing in return filing. Your e-way bill can be blocked. So these are the provisions that deals with e-way bill. So base provisions we are going to divide this chapter into two subtopics. Section 68 read along with Rule 138 we are going to discuss in the first part, where we are talking about the basic provisions of e-way bill. Thereafter we will discuss about 138A, B, C, D and E, where you are talking about the other provisions dealing with e-way bill. Now friends, when you are discussing the basic provisions of e-way bill, you have to keep one thing in mind, very clear thing, very clear cut thing. The focus is not on supply now. Please don't focus on supply. The focus is only on movement. The focus is only on movement of goods. I'll repeat, the focus is not on supply. The focus is only on movement of goods. Right, so your entire focus when we are discussing e-way bill, at least the basic provisions, how we have divided this chapter into two things. The first will be basic provisions, which will focus only on section 68 read along with Rule 138. And the second thing will be the other provisions where you talk about Rule 138A, Rule 138B, Rule 138C, Rule 138D and Rule 138E. So initial focus will be only on the basic concepts of EABL, where one thing you have to clearly understand, because now it has been a very long time since our journey of GST. And during our journey of GST, one thing or one word would have been very much incorporated in your subconscious mind, that it is supply. Suddenly in this chapter I am telling that please don't focus on supply, please focus on movement of goods. Please don't focus on supply, please focus on movement of goods. E-way bill is dependent on movement of goods. If at all there is supply, the base document is tax invoice or bill of supply along with delivery challan. If at all there is no supply, the base document is delivery challan along with e-way bill. If at all the movement of goods is there is supply, we have discussed that in the beginning. So please don't forget this basic chart. If at all there is movement of goods which results into supply, the base document is tax invoice or bill of supply supported by e-way bill. If at all there is movement of goods but there is no supply, then the base document is delivery challan, my friends, which you have clearly understood in your document chapter. Along with the supporting document, e-way bill. Along with the supporting document, e-way bill. So please focus on movement of goods and please don't focus on the term supply. Right? Friends, for understanding this basic provisions which deals with section 68 read along with rule 138, which runs into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, around 9 pages. Friends, we are going to apply the reverse engineering for this all these 9 pages. You will find that things are very simple. All the concepts which were given in the 9 pages, including the circulars. I will repeat, all the concepts which were given in the 9 pages, the earlier 9 pages, including the circulars. What we have tried to done, we have made sure that all these simple concepts are there. You understand with the help of conceptual example. You understand with the help of conceptual example. So we will be discussing about all these basic provisions, which is section 68 read along with 138. We are discussing about them and we are applying the concept called as reverse engineering, which we have applied in different chapters also. Here we will be applying all this concept of reverse engineering for the first part of the entire chapter. So we are talking about the first subtopic where basic provisions of e-way bill are discussed. We will take question by question. Let us try to understand that question by question, and automatically the concepts covered in the earlier 9 pages will be covered. 1 or 2 points of the earlier pages will not be covered. Once we are done with all those examples, we will go back and I will highlight, okay, only these 2 points are not covered. Now cover these points. This entire basic provisions of e-way bill, that is the first subtopic of e-way bill, which is the main part, is over. Right? So please do focus on the conceptual examples. We are just trying to ask questions and you make mistakes. And I have said you the thumb rule, my friends. E-way bill, delete your supply. Delete, remove your supply. What is important for e-way bill is movement of goods. What is important for e-way bill is movement of goods. Supply, not relevant. What is important is movement of goods. Don't make mistake with that. Right? The moment you start with this chapter, you have to tell yourself that forget about supply now. Only focus on movement of goods. Movement of goods. Now, let us again start with the basic questions. Example number 1. We have a lot of examples to complete this first subtopic where you are talking about basic provisions. We have around 36 examples. So everything will be covering. All the points will be covered. So don't worry about this conceptual understanding. We are just trying to apply reverse engineering rather than seeing that concept again, see the same example. We are completing both. With the example, we are completing the concept. Just try to answer it. If you make mistake, not a problem. Just try to answer it. Movement of goods is there, but there is no supply. Movement of goods is there, but there is no supply. Friends, what I said for e-way bill is forget about supply. Focus only on movement of goods. If movement of goods is there, but no supply, obviously there will be delivery challan. But whether e-way bill is required? Yes. E-way bill is required. Why? Movement of goods is there. Supply is there involving movement of goods. Now, supply is there along with movement of goods means the base document will be tax invoice or bill of supply. Movement of goods is there? Yes. E-way bill is required? Yes. Supply is there, but there is no movement of goods. You are supplying the goods, but unfortunately the goods are with yourself. They are not moving. Supply is there, but there is no movement of goods. There is no movement of, the moment there is no movement of goods, forget about supply. One thing keep in mind, e-way bill, movement of goods, no supply. E-way bill, movement of goods, no supply. That you have to tell. Because it is only a supporting document when the goods are in transit. It is only a supporting document when the goods are in transit. When there is no movement, the goods will never be in transit. Therefore, base document will be there. So, in the third case, where supply is there but no movement of goods, base document will be tax invoice or bill of supply. But e-way bill will not be there. But your e-way bill will not be there. Right. That is all about your example 1. Example 2 focuses on the same thing. Supplier of service involving movement of goods. This is very tricky. Right. You are a supplier of service, but the goods are moving. You will tell how. I think I have explained this long back. Again, I will try to explain. Supposing you are a outdoor caterer, or supposing you are an event manager. So, you are providing event management services. Don't you think that your goods will be moving? Right. So, when you talk about outdoor caterer or event management, they are all supplier of service, but their goods are moving. Yes or no? During the course of providing the services of outdoor catering or during the course of providing the services of event management, certain goods will be moving. Construction sector, goods will be moving. Now, forget about supply, whether it's supplier of goods or supplier of services. Whether there is movement of goods, yes, then whether e-way bill is required. Very much. So, this is very, very important. Just to give a bouncer, institute will tell that no, you're talking about a supplier of service, say event management service or outdoor catering service or construction service, where that supplier of service is moving the goods from his place to the location where the work is to be done or where the service is to be provided. Whether he is required to generate e-way bill for the goods which are being taken to that particular location, where he is not supplying those goods. He is not at all supplier of goods. The moment that event, that work is over, that service is over, the goods will come back. Whether you talk about outdoor caterer who has taken say utensils there and other items there, the goods will come back. Whether you talk about event management services where he has taken a lot of instruments, tents, etc., the moment the work is over, the goods will come back. Or whether you talk about your construction sector where the certain capital goods and certain tools and equipments are taken for doing construction service, the moment the construction is over, the tools and the capital goods will come back. Right. Is he a supplier of goods? No, he is a supplier of service. But whether the goods are moving, yes. When the goods are going to the location and when the goods are coming back, he has to generate a delivery challan. The base document will be delivery challan. Right. And the supporting document e-way bill. E-way bill is very much required. E-way bill is very much required. I think I have clearly given few examples for making you understand this point very, very clearly. For example, your outdoor catering service or event management service or construction service, any service sector. I just given few examples here, etc. Right. Now, example number 2, case 2. Supply of goods involved and supply of goods involving movement of goods. That is, which means that there is movement of goods along with supply of goods. Okay, movement of goods is there or not? Yes, the movement of goods is there. E-way bill is required. Right, obviously, if there is supply of goods, the base document will be tax invoice or bill of supply and the supporting document will be e-way bill. Supply of goods but no movement of goods. Now, again, if you see the third part, actually the point is the same. Right, so if you see the third point here, example 1 and third point, example 2. Supply but no movement of goods. Supplier of goods but no movement of goods. Same. Right, I just want to give you in different fashion. There is supply of goods, which means that obviously the base document will be tax invoice or bill of supply. So that supply determines your base document. But supporting document e-way bill is always determined by the movement of goods. Supply determines the base document. What is going to be a base document? But we are talking about, when you are talking about movement of goods, it determines whether the supporting document is required or not. In this case, e-way bill is not required because there is no movement of goods. If I were to tell you in summary of all the 6 cases discussed in example 1 and example 2, I will tell a very simple point. So, whether it was example 1 or whether it was example 2, if I were to tell summary of both these examples, simple point. If at all there is movement of goods, whatever is the base document that you decide based on supply, but that will be e-way bill. And if at all there is no movement of goods, whatever is the base document, only that will go. There won't be e-way bill. There won't be e-way bill. Because if there is no movement of goods, no e-way bill. Movement of goods, e-way bill. Just simple thumb rule. Ask yourself a question, is there movement of goods? Yes. Then the supporting document will be e-way bill. Base document will be determined by whether supply is there or not. If there is no movement of goods, then There is no e-way bill. Obviously, base document will be there. There is no movement of goods. There is no supporting document, no e-way bill. But that doesn't mean that base document will not be there. Base document will be there, right, in that scenario. Now, example 3, which is actually explained by way of circular. So, when I am talking about example 3, this example 3 rather is explained or clarified by your circular. Again, they required a circular to explain the basics. And if you remember the thumb rule that I have said in the beginning of the chapter, you will not go wrong here. The focus in this chapter is not on supply, it is on movement. I repeat, the focus on this chapter is not on supply, it is on movement. Now, in example 3, look at the scenario. That is supply of goods from Mumbai to Maharashtra. Sorry, Mumbai to Pune, that is both are within Maharashtra. Mumbai to Pune, both are within Maharashtra. But the movement is through Ahmedabad, but the goods are coming via Ahmedabad. So, there is supply from Mumbai to Pune, intrastate supply, because supplier is in Mumbai and recipient is in Pune. But the movement is through Ahmedabad, right? And before we discuss the answer, just you try to work out and make sure that you are getting the right answer, right? Supply of goods by supplier in SEZ. So, there is a supplier in SEZ in Maharashtra to recipient in DTA in Maharashtra. Now, if I were to explain this in terms of a simple example, right? The first case in example 3, supplier and recipient. Supplier and recipient. Supplier was there in Mumbai and recipient was there in Pune, right? So, we are talking about both within the state, but the movement happened through, the movement was routed through Ahmedabad. The goods went through Ahmedabad and reached the destination. So, movement of goods was through Ahmedabad, which means that we are talking about Gujarat, right? Friends, if I were to tell the answer here, the supply is intrastate supply. The supply is intrastate supply. Therefore, the tax will be CGST plus SGST, correct? But the movement is interstate movement, because the rules are different for interstate movement and intrastate movement, but the movement is interstate movement. Supply is intrastate supply, but the movement is interstate movement. Though the supply is intrastate supply CGST SGST, but here the movement is interstate movement. Supply is intrastate supply having CGST and SGST, but the movement is interstate movement. Now, you will tell what difference it makes. It makes a difference. The threshold limit for e-way bill for interstate movement might not be the same as threshold limit for e-way bill for intrastate movement. So, it is very important to understand that the movement is interstate movement. Now, let us take the second case of the same example. Supplier is there, recipient is there. Supplier is there in special economic zone, recipient is there in domestic tariff area. Both are in the state of Maharashtra. Correct. Now friends, if at all I tell that SEZ to DT or DTA to SEZ, immediately you will tell special economic zone, levy chapter, we know that it is interstate supply, correct? Yes, true. Now, the supply is interstate supply. The supply is interstate supply and the tax will be IGST because the supply is interstate supply. But when you talk about the movement of goods, which is within the state of Maharashtra, then in that scenario you will understand that the movement is intrastate movement. The movement is intrastate movement. Now friends, look at this beautiful scenario. In the second case, the supply is interstate supply because special economic zone to domestic tariff area. So supply is interstate supply, IGST will be there. But the movement of goods is intrastate, which means that the threshold limit for intrastate movement of goods in Maharashtra will be applicable for determining whether EVA bill is there or not. Right? Now the beautiful analysis of this is when you talk about case 1, supply was intra, therefore tax was CGST, SGST, but the movement was inter. Mumbai to Pune, so supply was intrastate supply CGST, SGST, but the goods went through Ahmedabad, that is Gujarat, so the movement was interstate movement. So threshold limit of EVA bill will be determined by interstate movement. It will not be determined by intrastate movement. Maharashtra will not decide, it will be decided by interstate movement. Whereas in the second case, special economic zone Maharashtra to DTA Maharashtra, supply is interstate supply because special economic zone is involved. So supply is interstate supply, tax will be IGST, but the movement of goods is only intrastate. The movement of goods, now we are not talking about GST, whether the goods are within the state. Yes, the goods are moving within the state, forget about supply. Movement of goods is intrastate movement, therefore the threshold limit for EVA bill will be determined by Maharashtra, because the threshold limit for intrastate movement of goods will be different from state to state. The threshold limit for interstate movement of goods all over India, the threshold limit for interstate movement of goods all over India, the threshold limit for EVA bill all over India is the same when you talk about interstate movement, and the threshold limit for EVA bill when you talk about intrastate movement, it will differ from state to state. It will be different from state to state. So if it is intrastate movement, the threshold limit for EVA bill will be different from state to state. But if it is interstate movement, one state to another, the threshold limit for generating EVA bill throughout India will be the same. So that is the difference here to appreciate. Friends, this two scenarios was again so much simple to understand. If at all you have remembered the thumb rule when we started with this topic, I said that only focus on movement of goods. Forget about supply. Whether the supply is intrastate supply, interstate supply, whether it is CGST, SGST or IGST, forget about it. Focus on the movement. Whether the movement is within the state, intrastate movement, and the threshold limit for EVA bill will be decided by state. It will be different from state to state. And the movement is through other state. If the movement happens, even if part of the movement is through other state, then it is interstate movement. See, if you see example or case number 1, it started from Maharashtra, it ended in Maharashtra, but it went through Gujarat. It started in Maharashtra, Mumbai, it ended in Maharashtra, Pune, but it went through Gujarat, that is Ahmedabad. So it is interstate movement. And the threshold limit for EVA bill will be same across India when you talk about interstate movement of goods. So this was a simple understanding, and things will be very tricky if you don't remember the basics of EVA bill. The moment I have explained you basics of EVA bill, I am sure that most of you, though you might have gone wrong here and there, the moment I have completed this example, now you are very clear. Okay, it was already said during the introduction of EVA bill that the focus should be on movement of goods. The focus should not be on supply. Same thing we are trying to do. This was explained by your CBSE circular. A well drafted CBSE circular understanding the logic of your EVA bill. So that completes example 3. Example 1, 2 and 3 are only introduction to very basic introduction to your EVA bill. Now let us start talking about the base concepts which are actually said in section 68 read along with your rule 138. EVA bill, then next question comes, who has to generate EVA bill? Who has to generate EVA bill? Normally, if I tell you EVA bill has to be generated by supplier, normal answer is EVA bill has to be generated by supplier, full stop. EVA bill has to be generated by supplier, full stop. So the normal answer is EVA bill has to be generated by supplier, whether registered or unregistered. In exception cases, e-waybill may have to be generated by recipient. When I'm telling this point, who has to generate e-waybill, the focus is on the term. They have used a term called as e-waybill has to be generated by person causing the movement of goods. I'll tell that term. E-waybill has to be generated by a person causing movement of goods. Now we are trying to understand what is meant by person causing movement of goods through example number 4. Now if the supply is by registered supplier to recipient, if the supply is by registered supplier to the recipient whether he is registered or unregistered, if the supply is by registered supplier to the recipient, whether the recipient is registered or unregistered, the general answer is, the moment I am talking about who has to generate e-waybill, the normal answer is e-waybill has to be generated by supplier. E-waybill has to be generated by supplier. Supplier is the person who is normally thought to be person who is causing movement of goods. Supplier is held to be a person who is normally causing movement of goods, but there's an exception. If at all you're talking about unregistered supplier to registered recipient, condition number 1, unregistered supplier, condition number 2, registered recipient, condition number 3, recipient is known at the time of commencement of movement of goods. So recipient is identified at the time of commencement of movement of goods, which means that supposing I am the unregistered supplier and you guys are the registered recipient. Now what are they trying to tell? As supplier is unregistered, they don't want supplier to generate e-waybill. That is a normal understanding, but it is conditional. Supplier should be unregistered. Recipient is registered. So I am the supplier who is unregistered and you guys are the recipient who are registered. And based on your order, I am bringing the goods to you, which means that recipient is known at the time of commencement of movement of goods. The moment I am taking the goods out of my shop, I know that I am taking to your place. So recipient is clearly, because based on your order only I am coming to your shop and coming to your place and delivering the goods. So in such a scenario, recipient has to generate e-waybill because he is treated as a person who is causing the movement of goods. Normally a person who is treated as causing the movement of goods is supplier. Normally a person who is treated as causing the movement of goods is supplier, whether he is registered or he is unregistered. Normally he is taken to be a person who is causing movement of goods. But in exceptional cases, the recipient will be treated as a person who is causing the movement of goods, but that comes with condition. What are the 3 conditions where you will be calling recipient as the person causing the movement of goods and therefore he has to generate e-waybill? What are the 3 conditions where recipient will be treated as the person causing movement of goods, and for that there will be recipient has to generate e-waybill? First, supplier should be unregistered. So I am the supplier, I should be unregistered. Second, recipient should be registered. Second is recipient should be registered. If you guys are the recipient, you should be registered in GST. Third, recipient is known at the time of commencement of movement of goods. You look at the language. When I am taking the goods out from my shop, I know that the goods are taken for delivery to your shop, which means that you also know that I am going to come to your shop. So recipient is known at the time of commencement of movement of goods. They want to tell that it should not be a case of chain sales. I should not come randomly to your shop and I should not give you some goods and sell the goods. That should not be the case. You have placed an order, registered recipient have placed an order to unregistered supplier, and based on that order I am leaving from my shop and coming to your shop. So that is a scenario where you are talking about recipient is known at the time of commencement of movement of goods. And as I am unregistered supplier, they don't want me to generate e-waybill. They want the recipient who is registered to generate e-waybill. Recipient who is registered to generate e-waybill, because even the recipient who is registered in this case knows that I am going to come to your shop. So the moment I am leaving from my shop, I should tell that, see, I have generated invoice which is not GST invoice because I am not registered in GST. You please generate e-waybill. So recipient will generate e-waybill, and then the movement of goods will happen. Right, in this case, when you are talking about recipient who is generating e-waybill, obviously that recipient is only registered recipient. Right, if at all I want to summarize this, normally who is treated as a person who is causing movement of goods? It is always supplier. Normally who has to generate e-waybill? Person who has to generate e-waybill is termed as person causing movement of goods. Normally who is taken as that person? It is only supplier, whether he is registered or unregistered. It is only supplier, whether it's registered or unregistered, he is treated to be a person who is causing, the movement of goods. So he has to generate e-way bill whether he is registered or even if he is unregistered. In exceptional cases, recipient is treated as person who is causing the movement of goods and he has to generate e-way bill. Now what are the exceptional cases? 3 conditions. Supplier is unregistered. So supplier, if I am the supplier, I should be unregistered. Second condition, recipient, you should be registered. If recipient is treated as person causing the movement of goods and he is required to generate e-way bill, supplier should be unregistered, recipient should be registered. And third, and the most important condition, recipient is known at the time of commencement of movement of goods. So supplier is not taking the goods randomly to the recipient. It is because of the order placed by the registered recipient on unregistered supplier that the movement of goods is happening. So now recipient was clearly identified or known at the time of commencement of movement of goods. In that scenario, they tell that the recipient who is registered will be treated as person who is causing the movement of goods because all the 3 conditions are satisfied, and he is required to generate e-way bill. Right? So friends, this clearly makes you understand what is meant by person who is causing the movement of goods and why we require that particular understanding of the definition person causing the movement of goods, because only a person who is causing the movement of goods is required to generate e-way bill. Normally it is supplier. In exceptional cases where all those 3 conditions that we have discussed very clearly are satisfied, then the recipient is required to generate e-way bill. Now, whether it is supplier or recipient, they can always authorize transporter to generate e-way bill. So whether it is supplier or recipient, whether it's, now you know that normal answer is supplier, but it can be also recipient. If you are talking about supplier, he may be registered or unregistered. But when you are talking about recipient generating e-way bill, you are only talking about a registered recipient because that happens to be one of the conditions where recipient is generating e-way bill. Now, both of them can authorize transporter to generate e-way bill. They can give an authorization to transporter that please generate e-way bill on our behalf. So that authorization can be given both by supplier or recipient, whosoever is required to generate e-way bill. They can give authorization to transporter to generate e-way bill in case of movement in any mode of transportation. And they can also authorize electronic commerce operator like Flipkart, Amazon, etc. or courier agency like professional couriers, fast track, etc. to generate e-way bill when that's the condition, when they are authorizing electronic commerce operator or courier agency to generate e-way bill, only in a scenario where the supply is through electronic commerce operator or through courier agency. What the supplier or the recipient can do, they can give authorization to electronic commerce operator or the courier agency to generate e-way bill. Supposing my goods are lying in Flipkart warehouse, right, and from there the moment I get an order online, I will be dispatching the goods. Now the supply of that goods is happening through Flipkart. So supply is through electronic commerce operator, and all the details of the vehicle will be actually only with the Flipkart. So I can authorize the Flipkart, that is electronic commerce operator, to generate e-way bill on my behalf. Whose tax invoice it will be? It will be my tax invoice. Flipkart will get only commission. So invoice will be mine. Tax invoice, supposing I am selling say television through Amazon, TV through Amazon or laptop through Amazon. So tax invoice will be that of mine, supplier. But the goods are moving from Amazon's warehouse, right? So Amazon is not the owner of that television or laptop. And based on my tax invoice, I repeat, based on my tax invoice, I will authorize Amazon to generate e-way bill because I don't have the vehicle details. Part B of e-way bill will talk about vehicle details. I don't know in which vehicle Amazon is going to transport the television or laptop. So what are the 2 points that important points are there which is given below? Example number 4. The point that is given below is whether he is a supplier or recipient who is required to generate e-way bill based on the term person causing movement of goods. What is the term? Person causing movement of goods. They can authorize transporter in any case. So that the authorization can be given by supplier or recipient to transporter in any case. Whether it is any mode of transportation, they can always authorize transporter. So authorization to transporter is unconditional. Authorization given to transporter is unconditional. They can always tell that okay, you generate e-way bill because anyways part B of e-way bill form 01 has to be will be having vehicle details, and it is the best person to know vehicle details is transporter. So they can always authorize transporter to generate e-way bill, no conditions. At times they can authorize electronic commerce operator, say for example Flipkart or Amazon, or courier agency, say for example professional couriers or fast track, to generate e-way bill on their behalf because the base document will be that of supplier. But that's a condition. What is the condition? The condition is that authorization to electronic commerce operator or courier agency is possible only when the supply is through, not to, supply is through that electronic commerce operator, that is through Flipkart or Amazon, or through courier agency, that is through professional couriers or fast track. So these are the important points that you have to understand, theoretical points, where I have explained the example defining what is meant by person, causing movement of goods, and who has to generate e-waybill, whether it is supplier or recipient, and given authorization. The notes is only talking about your authorization, right? Now friends, let us move on to your example 5 and 6. The next question which comes up, whether e-waybill has to be generated mandatorily for all the movement of goods or it is based on value. Friends, the normal answer is e-waybill has to be generated based on the value. I think if at all we have seen this two examples, I have said there is a limit, isn't it? E-waybill has to be generated based on the value. If it is interstate movement, the value is constant throughout India. If it is intrastate movement, the value will be different from state to state. So e-waybill has to be generally generated only when you're talking about when it is exceeding a particular limit. And that value, we are not going to go by your transaction value, we are going to go by consignment value, which will have an understanding when you see example number 7. As of now, the question is whether you have to generate e-waybill mandatorily irrespective of value, or you have to generate e-waybill based on value. Whether you have to generate e-waybill mandatorily irrespective of value, or whether you have to generate e-waybill based on value. Now let us see example number 5. Now example number 5, you are talking about movement of goods by principal in Maharashtra to job worker in Uttar Pradesh. Friends, we have clearly understood right in levy chapter that principal giving the goods to job worker is neither actual supply nor deemed supply. The base document will be delivery challan. But obviously there will be movement of goods, so e-waybill will be there. The question is whether it is mandatory e-waybill or value based e-waybill. Now if at all you are talking about mandatory e-waybill is there only in two cases. First case is explained in example number 5. If at all you are talking about movement of goods by principal in one state to job worker in another state, I'll repeat. If at all you are talking about movement of goods by principal in one state to job worker in other state, it is mandatory e-waybill. It is mandatory. Forget about the value of the goods involved. Now when I'm talking about the principal is giving say fabric to job worker from Maharashtra to job worker in Uttar Pradesh, the fabric value will be given in delivery challan. Delivery challan because there is no supply between principal and job worker for the goods. Obviously, even when the job worker is returning back the goods, there is no supply of a shirt. If at all job worker is converting the fabric to shirt and shirt is returned by the job worker to principal, there is no supply of shirt by job worker to principal. Therefore, even job worker will generate delivery challan for the shirt. So, you are talking about no supply. Supply is there only by job worker, but not of the fabric, not of the shirt. It is only of job working charges. Supply of services there. I think we have clearly discussed this 3-4 times, rather repeatedly we have discussed this when you talk about your levy chapter and even when you talk about your other chapters, right? But we are talking about e-waybill. Whether the base document is tax invoice or bill of supply, or whether the base document is delivery challan, e-waybill will be required. Now if at all you are talking about movement of goods by principal in one state, Maharashtra, to job worker in other state, Uttar Pradesh, irrespective of the value. When I am telling mandatory e-waybill, irrespective of the value, generate e-waybill. Even if the value is 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, 5 lakhs, 50 lakhs, generate e-waybill. Whether the value is 5,000, 50,000, 5 lakhs, 50 lakhs, 5 crores, generate e-waybill. Mandatory e-waybill means forget about the value, irrespective of the value, generate e-waybill. Now if I tell that no, wait, hold for a minute. If the movement of goods was by principal in Maharashtra to job worker in Maharashtra, which means same state. If it is there in the same state, then it is not mandatory e-waybill, then you have to generate e-waybill based on the value. When I tell it is based on the value, if it is exceeding that value, generate e-waybill. If it is below that value, don't generate e-waybill. And that value will be decided by the state of Maharashtra in this case, because the movement is within Maharashtra, intrastate movement within Maharashtra. The point that I want to drag home is, if at all you are talking about principal in one state to job worker in other state, don't see the value of the fabric which is being sent by the principal to job worker. whether the fabric value sent by the principal to job worker is 5,000 or 50,000 or 5 lakhs or 50 lakhs. Because the base document is value chalan, there is no supply. Forget about that particular value. On the base document, there might be 5,000 fabric or 50,000 fabric or 5 lakh fabric or 50 lakh fabric. Generate mandatory EVable. You have to keep the track because the goods are now going to the other state. And if I tell that the goods are moving by principal in Maharashtra to job worker in Maharashtra, I am not telling that no EVable is required. I am telling that EVable will be required, but depending on the limit. When I tell value based EVable, if it is exceeding the value, generate EVable. If it is less than the value, don't generate EVable. You are getting that difference. So in case 1 of example 5, where the movement of goods was between principal in one state to job worker in other state, you have to generate EVable, whether it is 5,000 or 50,000 or 5 lakhs or 50 lakhs, generate EVable, mandatory EVable irrespective value. And when I talk about movement of goods by principal in one state to job worker of the same state, so it is intra-state movement within that particular state, then EVable will be required, but based on the value. If at all the value is crossing that threshold limit, which we'll be discussing what is that threshold limit, then generate EVable. If the value is up to that threshold limit, no need to generate EVable. If the value is crossing the threshold limit, then generate EVable. If the value is up to the threshold limit of EVable, then don't generate EVable, right? But this threshold limit is applicable only when you're talking about principal to job worker within the state. If principal one state or job worker other state, forget about the value, mandatory EVable. So the first case of mandatory EVable is principal in one state to job worker in other state. Now let us see the sixth example, which will tell that there is another case of mandatory EVable where you don't see the value, you have to generate EVable. If at all you are talking about handicraft goods, supply of handicraft goods, right, from Maharashtra to UP. So you are talking about supply, which means the base document will be tax invoice. Supply of handicraft goods where you are exempted from registration. Normally, if at all you are having interstate supply of goods, mandatory registration will be there under section 24. Just recollect that. Normally, if you are having interstate supply of goods, I am talking about supply of goods, interstate, not services. Interstate supply of goods, mandatory registration. There was only one relaxation where you are talking about handicraft goods where you may be exempted from registration. And that exemption notification we have seen in your registration chapter. Right, your threshold limit, you will be getting the relaxation of 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs as the case may be. You will be getting that relaxation. Of 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs as the case may be. If at all you are talking about interstate supply of handicraft goods. Interstate supply of other goods, mandatory registration. Interstate supply of handicraft goods, there may be an exemption from registration if your pan India aggregate turnover is up to 20 lakhs and 10 lakhs. Plus recollect that you should disclose your PAN number, plus you should mandatorily generate EVable. Exemption from registration under section 24 was telling that, okay, we are exempting you from registration, right, though you have interstate supply, but you have to mandatorily generate EVable. Even in that exemption notification, which was from registration for handicraft goods, the same point was there, mandatory EVable. The point I want to tell is, the moment they tell that, okay, you need not take registration for handicraft goods, even though there is interstate supply of handicraft goods, because there is a relaxation for interstate supply of handicraft goods from getting GST registration, and that relaxation is given under section 24 read along with section 23. It is section 24 read along with section 23. That we have discussed clearly in your registration chapter. What are they trying to tell? They are telling that we have given you relaxation from registration. Don't take registration, but we want to track the goods. So mandatorily generate EVable. So whether the value is 5,000 or 50,000 or 5 lakhs or 50 lakhs, mandatorily generate EVable. Exemption from registration is with the condition that mandatory EVable. Even that exemption was talking about the same. Exemption from registration is with the condition that mandatory EVable has to be generated. Now you may ask whether an unregistered supplier can generate EVable. Yes, we have discussed already. Here, this is a classic case where you are talking about mandatory EVable. This mandatory EVable will be actually generated by unregistered supplier. This is a classic case where you are talking about mandatory e-way bill, but this will be generated by unregistered supplier because he is getting the benefit of not being registered under section 24 read along with section 23 because that relaxation is given by section 23 notification, right? Now if I tell that no, I am supplier of handicraft goods from Maharashtra to UP, but I am registered. The moment you are registered, then they tell that okay, already we are having track on you. The moment you are registered, then they tell that already we are having track on you. Then please generate e-way bill based on the value. If it is crossing the threshold limit of e-way bill, generate e-way bill. If it is up to the threshold limit of e-way bill, no need to generate e-way bill. Friends, what are the two cases where you talk about mandatory e-way bill? Principal from one state to job worker in another state, mandatory e-way bill, forget about the value, always generate e-way bill. But if a principal is in one state and job worker is also in that same state, then I am not telling no e-way bill, I am telling e-way bill will be based on the value. If it is crossing the limit of e-way bill, generate e-way bill. If it is up to the limit of e-way bill, don't generate e-way bill. That was example number 5. Now example number 6 was very peculiar, and that is only for handicraft goods. If you are talking about supplier of handicraft goods, obviously from one state to another state, where basically you have to get compulsory registration under section 24, but you got relaxation from registration, which means that though the supply was of handicraft goods from one state to another state, though actually mandatory registration was required, but you got a relaxation under section 23, which means that you are an unregistered supplier. So supply of handicraft goods from Maharashtra to Uttar Pradesh, where basically you are asked to take mandatory registration, but suddenly you got a relaxation. That relaxation was with the condition, even that the same point is covered even in that relaxation. It is two-way checking up. Even in that relaxation, it was said that you are not required to be registered if your PAN India aggregate turnover is up to 20 lakhs, 10 lakhs, plus you show your PAN number, plus you generate e-way bill. So they are telling that okay, we are not asking you to get registered, you are getting relaxation. But when we are telling you not to get registered, we want to have a track on you, generate e-way bill. They are telling that we are giving you relief from registration, but with the condition, generate mandatory e-way bill. When I tell generate mandatory e-way bill, whether the value is 5,000 or 50,000 or 5 lakhs or 50 lakhs, you are required to generate e-way bill. So exemption from registration, relaxation from registration was with the condition that generate mandatory e-way bill, and the same thing is repeated in your e-way bill chapter. Even there when you are discussing registration, I said the same point. You will have the same point in your e-way bill chapter. So exemption from registration, no need to take registration, is with the condition that please generate mandatory e-way bill, and that was said in your registration chapter under section 23. It is again repeated in your e-way bill chapter. The same point is repeated, but they are in two different places of the law so that they match, harmonious construction, so that they match, right? Relaxation from registration for handicraft goods, even if it is interstate supply of handicraft goods, but there should be mandatory e-way bill. And if I am talking about supply of handicraft goods from one state to another state, Maharashtra to Uttar Pradesh, and you did not take relaxation from registration, which means that you are registered, then value based e-way bill. If at all you are unregistered because of that relaxation, then they tell mandatory e-way bill. If at all you are registered, which means you are not taking the benefit of that relaxation, or you are not covered by that relaxation because your PAN India aggregate turnover crosses 20 lakhs and lakhs, then they tell that generate e-way bill, but based on the value. If that value of the goods crosses the threshold limit of e-way bill, generate e-way bill. If it is up to that threshold limit of e-way bill, don't generate e-way bill, right? Now friends, there were only two cases of mandatory e-way bill if I were to tell in statements now, because we have seen both example 5 and 6 which talks about this mandatory e-way bill. Only two instances: principal one state to job worker other state, mandatory e-way bill, don't see the value, generate e-way bill. Second case, supplier of only handicraft goods, not any other goods, supplier of only handicraft goods, that too with a condition where he was getting an relaxation from registration. Supplier of handicraft goods from one state to another state, where he was taking the benefit of not getting registered. Under section 24 read along with section 23. So if he is taking the benefit of not being registered, generate mandatory e-way bill. All other cases, not only the other two cases, all other cases it is value based e-way bill. Other than these two cases where they tell you are required to generate e-way only based on the value, which means if it is crossing that particular value, generate e-way. If it is up to that value, don't generate e-way. Now when you're talking about all the other cases, now what is that all other cases? The moment when you're talking about all other cases, what is that all other cases? This all other cases is actually explained in your example number 7. In all other cases, you have to generate e-way based on the value. Now friends, what is that value that you have to focus on? The value that you have to focus on is consignment value. And friends, when you are discussing about this value, we are focusing on consignment value which should cross 50,000. And friends, our focus is only on interstate movement. You'll tell, why focus is only on interstate movement? Why not intrastate movement? We are not discussing about intrastate movement. From now onwards, whenever you are going to discuss about value based e-way, we are not discussing about intrastate movement because it will be different. It will differ from state to state. So we are talking about value based e-way but only in case of interstate movement. And if you ask me why we are not discussing intrastate movement, it will be different for the state of Maharashtra, it will be different for the state of Delhi, it will be different for the state of West Bengal, it will be different for the state of Andhra Pradesh, it will be different for the state of Tamil Nadu. So our focus when you talk about value based e-way is only on interstate movement. Mandatory e-way, there are only 2 cases. All other cases it is value based e-way. Our focus when you are talking about value based e-way, where the value is technically called as consignment value, we are focusing on value based e-way only for interstate movement. Now if you have this doubt that why we are not discussing value based e-way for intrastate movement, because value based e-way for intrastate movement will be different from state to state. That we have to see the state, and we don't have SGST law applicable for your exams. So we are not discussing value based e-way for intrastate movement because it will be different from state to state. Because it will be different from state to state. So we are not discussing about value based e-way for intrastate movement. We are discussing about value based e-way, that is consignment value limit only for interstate movement, and the value based e-way for interstate movement. Rather, we are discussing only value based e-way for interstate movement. That value is technically called as consignment value, and the limit for generating e-way is 50,000. So whenever there is interstate movement, and if the consignment value is more than 50,000, generate e-way. Whenever there is interstate movement and if the consignment value is more than 50,000, generate e-way. Whenever there is interstate movement and if the consignment value is less than or equal to 50,000, then it is optional for you to generate e-way. So when you talk about value based e-way, friends, when we are talking about value based e-way, what are we trying to understand? So the moment I am explaining or we are discussing about value based e-way, bifurcate into 2. Interstate movement and you are talking about intrastate movement. Interstate movement and friends, you are talking about intrastate movement. Right, if at all you are talking about interstate movement, if the consignment value is more than 50,000, if the consignment value is up to 50,000, right. For intrastate movement, we don't know the consignment value because it will be different from state to state. The consignment value is up more than a particular limit. I am just writing a limit. We don't know that limit because it will be different from state to state. And if the consignment value is up to that limit, and this limit, friends, will be different from state to state. This limit will be different for intrastate movement, it will be different from state to state. Now let us focus again on your interstate movement, where the consignment value is more than 50,000 or the consignment value is up to 50,000. If the consignment value happens to be more than 50,000, then generate e-way. generate because it is crossing that limit. If it is up to 50,000, it is your wish. You may generate EVable even in that scenario, or you may not generate EVable. It is up to you. If it is up to that limit, it is up to you. You may generate EVable or you may not generate EVable. And friends, if you are talking about intra-state movement, then consignment value more than the limit. That limit may be 1 lakh decided by Maharashtra state or decided by Delhi state 1.5 lakhs. I'm just giving hypothetical examples. It is different from state to state. So if you have to see the state and then you have to see the limit, right? So if that consignment value is more than the limit within that particular state, which will be different from state to state, again the answer is the same. If it is more than the limit of that state, then generate EVable. If it is up to the limit of that state, then it is up to you. You may generate EVable or you may not generate EVable. So when I am writing the limit of that state, so that limit of that state will be different from state to state. Limit of that state will be different from state to state. So what I was trying to explain when you talk about value based EVable was, you are talking about interstate movement only. Our focus is only and only on interstate movement, where the consignment value, if it is more than 50,000, you have to generate EVable, and if it is up to 50,000, it's up to you. You may or may not generate EVable. That is your option. But when you talk about intrastate movement, that limit will be different from state to state, and if it is more than the limit of that particular state, you have to generate EVable. If it is up to the limit of that state, then again you may or you may not generate EVable. So our focus is only on intrastate movement, value based EVable. There were only 2 cases where mandatory EVable was required, and that we have discussed thoroughly. All other cases are value based EVable. So you have got a very clear picture of value based EVable. Now for interstate movement, the value based EVable is what? If the consignment value in interstate movement is more than 50,000, then you have to generate EVable. If the consignment value in interstate movement is more than 50,000, then you have to generate EVable. Now friends, you have to understand what is consignment value. We are trying to understand the definition of consignment value through this example number 7. Right. Now taxable goods is 45,000, and GST at 18% on the same is say 8,100. Friends, consignment value means the transaction value under section 15 plus GST. Consignment value is nothing but transaction value under GST, which was nothing but your 45,000 plus GST in this case, which is 8,100. So the consignment value in this example is 53,100, which is more than the limit of 50,000. You have to generate EVable. Consignment value is equal to transaction value under section 15, the valuation chapter that we have discussed. Transaction value under section 15 is your GST value, transaction value under section 15 plus GST and compensation cess. You have to add GST and compensation cess. So example 7 case 1 clearly explains you that you are not required to see 45,000. If at all you are seeing only the transaction value 45,000, you would have said that no, EVable is your wish. You may or you may not generate EVable. But consignment value is what? Transaction value under section 15, which is 45,000 plus GST and compensation cess, which is 8,100, which is 53,100. Therefore, you are required to generate EVable. Now, case 2. You are talking about exempt goods 60,000. Now, if I were to write the definition of consignment value so that you will have a clarity. Consignment value is equal to transaction value under section 15 plus GST and compensation cess minus value of exempt goods, which means in case 2, consignment value will be equal to, you will start with 60,000, but minus value of exempt goods. The entire thing is value of exempt goods, which is 0. So though the transaction value under section 15 was 60,000, but the consignment value is 0, because what is the definition of consignment value for the EVable purposes? It is transaction value under section 15, which is 60,000 plus GST and compensation cess, which will not be there because it is an exempt goods. minus value of exempt goods. Again you will subtract 60,000. So net effect is it is 0. So whether e-way bill is required now mandatorily? No, it is up to you. So now there is no requirement of e-way bill. You may generate e-way bill, but there is no requirement of e-way bill. Third scenario. You are talking about taxable goods 30,000 which will be with GST at say 18% 5,400 and exempt goods 60,000. So if you are talking about the total transaction value here, it is what? 60,000. How 60,000? Taxable goods 30,000, exempt goods 30,000. Plus you are going to add GST 5,400. Plus you are going to add GST 5,400 minus you are going to subtract value of exempt goods which will give you 35,400. You have to focus only on the taxable value goods along with your GST. So it is 35,400. Again e-way bill is not required. Friends, consignment value is very, very different, right? And these three cases in example number 7 will clear all the confusions with respect to consignment value. The examples are drafted in such a way that you will get a 360 degrees approach, and the moment you see all these three cases to find consignment value, you will find that okay, I am now very clear. What is definition of consignment value for e-way bill purposes? Transaction value under section 15, what have we understood? That plus GST and compensation cess minus value of exempt goods, right? In the first case, if you are looking only at 45,000, you are wrong. You have to see 45,000 plus 8,100, 53,100, you have to generate e-way bill. Second case, if you look at 60,000, you are wrong, because second case it is exempt goods. So 60,000 minus 60,000 it is 0. No need to generate e-way bill. Third case, if you are looking at 60,000, it is wrong. Taxable goods 30,000, exempt goods 30,000. So 60,000 is wrong. It is 60,000 plus GST, which is 5,400, which is of GST of taxable goods, minus value of exempt goods minus 30,000. So the net effect is 60,000 plus 5,400 minus 30,000, which is 35,400, which is within the limit of 50,000. No need to generate e-way bill. So these three cases of example number 7 will clearly explain you that when are you required to generate e-way bill based on the value. So now you are very clear with the definition of consignment value. This example was only to explain you how to determine consignment value, and for interstate movement of goods, only if the consignment value of the goods is more than 50,000. I'll repeat. For interstate movement of the goods, if the consignment value is more than 50,000, you have to generate e-way bill. If it is up to 50,000, you are not required to generate e-way bill. You may, but you are not actually required to generate e-way bill. So this clearly makes you understand what is the definition of consignment value, right? So that again completes your example number 7, and we have even theoretically written what is consignment value. Transaction value under section 15 plus GST and compensation cess minus your value of exempt goods. Value of exempt goods if at all taxable and exempt goods are given together. If at all taxable and exempt goods are given together. Now example number 8. Now when you talk about example number 8 and example number 9, we are focusing on when to generate e-way bill. What point of time you have to generate e-way bill. Example number 8 and example number 9, we are focusing on at what point of time you have to generate e-way bill. What point of time you have to generate e-way bill. Now example number 8 focuses on movement of goods by way of road. Focuses on movement of goods by way of road. And example number 9 focuses on movement of goods by other than road, that is rail or air or vessel. Example 8, when you talk about movement of goods through road, when you have to generate e-way bill. Example 9, it talks about movement of goods through rail, air or vessel. Now friends, if at all you are talking about movement of goods through road, you have to divide that into two parts. Let us focus on movement of goods through road. It is through your own conveyance or hired conveyance or public conveyance. It is through your own conveyance or hired conveyance. You have taken the entire vehicle on hire or public conveyance, first category. Second category, it is through a transporter. You are not taking the goods through your own vehicle or a hired vehicle that you have full control of, or a public conveyance like say bus, right? You are moving the goods through That is the first category, either your own conveyance or hired conveyance or public conveyance. Second category, you are taking the goods to a transporter. You are just giving to transporter. He may take in any vehicle. You don't have control, right, through a transporter. Now, in both the cases, friends, you have to understand that e-way bill has to be generated before the commencement of movement of goods. I'll repeat the point. E-way bill has to be generated before the commencement of movement of goods. Before the commencement of movement of goods. Before the commencement of movement of goods. Before even goods are taken outside your place, generate e-way bill. E-way bill has to be generated before the movement of commencement of goods. E-way bill has to be generated before the commencement of movement of goods. Before the movement starts, generate e-way bill. So when it is by road, the normal understanding is before the movement starts, before the commencement of movement of goods starts, generate e-way bill. There is a special note which is given below, and that special note, my friends, is only for transporter. We'll understand that special note later. There's a special note which is given. We'll understand the special note with the help of your example number 10. So the special note will be understanding through your example 10. So forget about that special note. That's a special note given. That's a special note for what? That's a special note only given for your transporter category. The special note is not for your own conveyance or hired conveyance or public conveyance. Special note is only for transporter, my friends. Special note is only when the goods are taken through transporter on road. Right. If I were to summarize this, when the movement of goods is by road, whether by your own conveyance, hired conveyance or public conveyance, or whether through transporter, the base answer is the same. You have to generate e-way bill before the commencement of movement of goods. Before the commencement of movement of goods, before the movement of goods starts. Before the movement of goods starts. For transporter category, there is a small relaxation which we will understand in example 10. For this transporter category, we are not talking about own conveyance, hired conveyance or public conveyance. For the transporter category, there is a relaxation which we will understand with the help of example number 10, which is a master example. Example number 10, I am going to call this as a master example to understand the entire concept. This will be a master example which we will understand with the help of a chart. Right. Now friends, we are talking about what? We are talking about a scenario where you are talking about movement of goods by rail or air or vessel. Movement of goods by rail or by air or by vessel. If you are talking about movement of goods by rail or by air or by vessel, the answer is e-way bill can be generated before or after the commencement of movement of goods. E-way bill can be generated before or after the commencement of movement of goods. So they tell that even after the commencement of movement of goods, you can generate e-way bill. E-way bill can be generated now before or after the commencement of movement of goods. In the earlier part, e-way bill was to be generated only before goods. When you are talking about road category, e-way bill has to be generated before the commencement of movement of goods. But when you talk about rail, air, vessel category, e-way bill can be generated before or after the commencement of movement of goods. Before or after the commencement of movement of goods. But wait, for this rail category, there is a note. For this rail category, there is a special note. There is no special note for air and vessel category. For this rail category, for rail category, they tell actually the common point for a rail, air and vessel is that you can generate e-way bill either before the commencement of movement of goods or even after the commencement of movement of goods. Even if the movement has started, you can generate e-way bill even after that. But for rail, they are very specific. For rail, they are very specific. This is actually a point for rail which has been covered here. For rail, they are very, very specific. You can generate e-way bill even after the commencement of movement of goods. But for rail category, before the goods are delivered to consignee, e-way bill has to be generated. So you can generate e-way bill even after the commencement of movement of goods. Even after the consignor has dispatched the goods via rail, you can generate e-way bill. But before the goods are reaching the consignee, before the delivery of the goods is taken by the consignee, e-way bill should have been generated. E-way bill should have been generated. So if I were to explain this in a very simple chart, we're talking about movement of goods. First category is by road, and the second category is when you're talking about rail, air or vessel. So when you're talking about road, again the bifurcation is two. You're talking about own conveyance, hired conveyance, public conveyance, and other category you're talking about transporter. Right? When you talk about rail, air, vessel, the categorization is rail on one side and by air and vessel on the other side. Now let us discuss about the common points. If it is by road, friends, the moment it is all about by road, you should have generated e-way bill before the commencement of movement of goods. Before the commencement started, generate e-way bill. If it is by rail, air or vessel, you can generate e-way bill before or even after the commencement of movement of goods. Right, that was a special point. So that is a relaxation when you talk about rail, air or vessel. Now a special point only about rail. You can generate e-way bill even after your commencement of movement of goods, but e-way bill should have been generated before the delivery of goods is taken. Before the delivery of goods is taken by consignee. So you can even generate e-way bill after the commencement of movement of goods, but before that person comes, before the consignee comes and takes the delivery of goods, takes the goods in his possession before the delivery of goods is taken by consignee. So before the goods are actually delivered to the consignee, e-way bill should have been generated. For air and vessel, they are not talking specifically anything about it, but it means within a reasonable period of time. So when something specific is not given, it doesn't mean that you are not required to generate e-way bill or you are going to generate e-way bill after a month or a year. Within reasonable period of time. Within reasonable period. Right. So this is a special point for rail. For rail, they have said that you can generate e-way bill for rail, air and vessel, rather for all the three categories. They have said that you can generate e-way bill before or even after the commencement of movement of goods. But for rail, they have given the end time limit. For rail, they have given the end time limit. What is the end time limit for rail? Before the delivery of goods is taken by the consignee, at least before that generate e-way bill. So I may have, as a consignor, I may have dispatched the goods by rail on say 10th of July, and the goods are reaching say on say 25th of July, and before you guys consignee are taking the delivery, it should be made sure that e-way bill is generated. So e-way bill is not required to be generated before 10th of July. No, can be generated even after that. But before you guys are taking delivery, supposing you guys are taking delivery on 30th of July. So before you guys are taking delivery on 30th of July, please make sure that the e-way bill is generated. Right, for rail. For air and vessel, you can generate e-way bill either before or after commencement of movement of goods. They are not specified the end time limit. It means reasonable time. It means within a reasonable time generate e-way bill. Now when you talk about road, whether it is by own conveyance, hired conveyance, public conveyance on one side or transporter, they are very clear. They are very clear that you have to generate e-way bill before the commencement of movement of goods. Before the commencement of movement of goods. They are very strict rather. They are very strict rather. And for transporter, they have given a relaxation. For transporter, they have given a relaxation. Only for transporter, they have given a relaxation, which I said will be discussing when we are discussing example number 10. So that relaxation we are yet to discuss. For transporter, they have given a small relaxation, which I said that we will be discussing in example number 10. Right. So this is the entire understanding of your example number 8 and 9. 8 and 9.